Two-Timer by Frederick Brown. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothmann. Two-Timer by Frederick Brown. Experiment. The first time machine, gentlemen, Professor Johnson proudly informed his two colleagues. True, it is a small-scale experimental model. It will operate only on objects weighing less than 3 pounds, 5 ounces, and for distances into the past and future of 12 minutes or less. But it works. The small-scale model looked like a small scale, a postage scale, except for 2 dials in the part under the platform. Professor Johnson held up a small metal cube. Our experimental object, he said, is a brass cube weighing 1 pound, 2.3 ounces. First, I shall send it 5 minutes into the future. He leaned forward and set one of the dials on the time machine. Look at your watches, he said. They looked at their watches. Professor Johnson placed the cube gently on the machine's platform. It vanished. 5 minutes later to the second, it reappeared. Professor Johnson picked it up. Now 5 minutes into the past. He set another dial. Holding the cube in his hand, he looked at his watch. It is now 6 minutes before 3 o'clock. I shall now activate the mechanism by placing the cube on the platform at exactly 3 o'clock. Therefore, the cube should, at 5 minutes before 3, vanish from my hand and appear on the platform 5 minutes before I place it there. How can you place it there, then? Asked one of his colleagues. It will, as my hand approaches, vanish from the platform and appear in my hand to be placed there. 3 o'clock. Notice, please. The cube vanished from his hand. It appeared on the platform of the time machine. See, 5 minutes before I shall place it there, it is there. His other colleague frowned at the cube. But, he said, what if, now that it's already appeared 5 minutes before you place it there, you should change your mind about doing so and not place it there at 3 o'clock? Wouldn't there be a paradox of some sort involved? An interesting idea, Professor Johnson said. I had not thought of it, and it will be interesting to try. Very well, I shall not. There was no paradox at all. The cube remained. But the entire rest of the universe, professors and all, vanished. Sentry. He was wet and muddy and hungry and cold, and he was 50,000 light years from home. A strange blue sun gave light, and the gravity twice what he was used to made every movement difficult. But in 10,000 years, this part of the war hadn't changed. The flyboys were fine with their sleek spaceships and their fancy weapons. When the chips were down, though, it was still the foot soldier, the infantry, that had to take the ground and hold it, foot by bloody foot. Like this damn planet of a star he'd never heard of until they landed him there. And now it was sacred ground because the aliens were there too. The aliens, the only other intelligent race in the galaxy. Cruel, hideous, and repulsive monsters. Contact had been made with them near the center of the galaxy after the slow, difficult colonization of a dozen thousand planets. And it had been war at sight. They'd shot without even trying to negotiate or to make peace. Now, planet by bitter planet, it was being fought out. He was wet and muddy and hungry and cold, and the day was raw with the high wind that hurt his eyes. But the aliens were trying to infiltrate, and every sentry post was vital. He stayed alert, gun ready. 50,000 light years from home, fighting on a strange world, and wondering if he'd ever live to see home again. And then he saw one of them crawling toward him. He drew a bead and fired. The alien made that strange, horrible sound they all make, then lay still. He shuddered at the sound and the sight of the alien lying there. One ought to be able to get used to them after a while, but he'd never been able to. Such repulsive creatures they were, with only 2 arms and 2 legs, ghastly white skin, and no scales. The End of Two-Timer by Frederick Brown.
Two Weeks in August by Frank M. Robinson. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Berard. 2 Weeks in August by Frank M. Robinson. The humblest events sometimes result from the most grandiose beginnings. You'd never imagine space travel starting this way, for instance. I suppose there's a guy like McCleary in every office. Now, I'm not a hard man to get along with, and it usually takes quite a bit more than overly bright remarks from the office boy to bother me. But try as it might, I could never get along with McCleary. To be as disliked as he was, you have to work at it. What kind of guy was he? Well, if you came down to the office one day proud as punch because of something little Johnny or Josephine had said, it was a sure cinch that McCleary would horn in with something his little Louie had spouted off that morning. At any rate, when McCleary got through, you felt like taking Johnny to the doctor to find out what made him subnormal. Or maybe you happened to buy a new Super 8 that week and were bragging about the mileage, the terrific pickup, and how quickly she responded to the wheel. Leave it to McCleary to give a quick rundown on his own car that would make you feel like selling yours for junk at the nearest scrap heap. Well, you see what I mean. But by far the worst of it was when vacation time rolled around. You could forgive a guy for topping you about how brainy his kids are, and you might even find it in your heart to forget the terrific bargain he drove to work in. But vacation time was when he'd really get on your nerves. You could pack the wife and kids in Old Reliable and roll out to the lake for your 2 weeks in August. You might even break the bank and spend the 2 weeks at a poor man's Sun Valley. But no matter where you went, when you came back, you'd have to sit in silence and listen to McCleary's account of his vacation in the Adirondacks, or his tramp in the Canadian wilds, or maybe even the old French Quarter. The trouble was, he always had the photographs, the ticket stubs, and the souvenirs to prove it. Where he got the money I'll never know. Sometimes I'd tell the wife about it and she'd sniff and wonder what kind of shabby house they lived in that they could afford all the other things. I never looked him up myself. Tell you the truth, I was afraid I'd find the McClearys lived on Park Avenue. Now, you look forward to a vacation all year, but particularly during the latter part of July, when, what with the heat and the stuffy office, you begin to feel like a half-done hot dog at a barbecue. I was feeling even worse than usual as I was faced with spending my 2 weeks in my own backyard, most of my vacation dough having gone to pay the doctor. The only thing I minded was having McCleary find out about it and seeing that phony look of sympathy roll across his fat face while he rambled on about the vacation he was going to have. It was lunchtime, and we had just finished talking about the latest on television and what was wrong with the administration and who'd win the pennant when Bob Young brought up the subject of vacations. It turned out he was due for a trip to the Ozarks, and Donnelly was going after wall-eyed pike in northern Wisconsin. I could sense McCleary prick up his ears clear across the room. "How about you, Bill?" Donnelly asked me. "Got any plans?" I winked heavily and jerked a thumb warningly toward McCleary, making sure McCleary couldn't see the gesture. "My vacation is really going to be out of this world this time," I said. "Me and the wife are going to Mars. Dry, you know. Even better than Arizona for her sinus." Even with the wink they were caught off guard for a minute. "Mars?" Donnelly said feebly, edging his chair away. "Yeah, sure. Great place. Never been there myself, though." Young just gaped, then grinned as he caught on. "I understand it's a wonderful spot," he chipped in. I casually peeled a hard-boiled egg the wife had packed in my lunch bucket and leaned back in my swivel chair. "It's really swell," I said, dreamily, but loud enough so McCleary couldn't help but overhear. Drifting down the Grand Canal at evening, the sun a faint golden disk behind the crystal towers of Marsport. I let my voice drift into a long sigh and reached for Donley's sack of grapes. About this time McCleary had gnawed his way through a big pastrami sandwich and waddled over. He stood there expectantly, but we carefully ignored him. "Always wanted to go myself," Donley said in the same tone of voice he would have used to say he'd like to go to California someday. "Pretty expensive though, isn't it?" "Expensive?" I raised a studiedly surprised eyebrow. "Oh, I suppose a little, but it's worth it. The wife and I got a roomette on the Princess of Mars for $139.50. That's one way, of course." "Mars!" Young sighed wistfully. There was a moment of silence, with all three of us paying silent tribute to the ultimate in vacations. McCleary slowly masticated a leaf of lettuce, his initial look of suspicion giving way to half belief. "Let's hear some more about it," Young said enthusiastically, suddenly recovering from his reverie. "Oh, there isn't much more," I said indifferently. "We plan to stay at Red Sands Hotel in Marsport. American plan. Take in Marsport with maybe a side trip to Crystallite. If we have time, we might even take a waterway cruise to the North Pole." I broke off and dug Donley in the ribs. "Man, you never fished until you have a Martian flying fish at the end of the line." I grabbed a ruler off the desk and began using it as an imaginary rod and reel. "Talk about fight! Oh, sorry, Mac." My ruler had amputated part of a floppy lettuce leaf that hung from McCleary's sandwich. I settled down in my chair again and started paying attention to my lunch. "Nothing like it," I added between mouthfuls of liverwurst. "How about entertainment?" Young winked slyly. "Well, you know, the wife will be along," I said, "but some of the places near the Grand Canal and those Martian mist maidens brother, if I was unattached!" "There ain't any life on Mars," McCleary said, suspicious again. All three of us looked at him in shocked silence. "He says there's no life on Mars," Donley repeated. "You ever been there, McCleary?" I asked sarcastically. "No, but just the same." "All right," I cut in, "then you don't know whether there is or isn't. So kindly reserve your opinion until you know a little about the subject under discussion." I turned back to Donley and Young. "Really a wonderful place for your health. Dry, thin air. Nice and cool at night. And beautiful. From Marsport you can see low-slung mountains in the distance, dunes of soft, red sand stretching out to them. If I were you, Bob, I'd forget all about the Ozarks and sign up on the rocket." "There ain't any rockets going to Mars," McCleary said obstinately. "Isn't," I corrected. "I mean, there is. Besides, McCleary, just because you never heard of something doesn't mean it doesn't exist." "The government's still working on V2," McCleary said flatly. "They haven't even reached the moon yet." I sighed softly, acting disgusted at having to deal with somebody as stupid as McCleary. "Mac, that's the government, and besides, they're dealing with military rockets. And did you ever hear of the government perfecting something before private industry? Who perfected the telephone, the radio, television? The government? No, private industry, of course. Private industry has always been ahead of the government on everything, including rockets. Get on the stick, Mac." McCleary started in on his lettuce leaf again, looking very shrewd. "How come I never heard of it before now?" he asked, springing the clincher argument. "Look, Mac, this is relatively new. The company's just starting. Can't afford to take full-page ads and that sort of thing. Just give 'em time, that's all. Why, a couple of years from now you'll be spending your vacation on Venus or Jupiter or some place like that. From now on, California and the Bahamas will be strictly old hat." McCleary looked half believing. "Where'd you get your tickets?" I waved vaguely in the direction of downtown. "Oh, there must be at least a couple of agencies downtown. Might even be able to find them in the phone book. Look under Interplanetary Rocket Lines, or something like that. You might have a little difficulty, of course. Like I say, they're not too well advertised." McCleary was about to say something more, but then the 1 o'clock bell rang and we went back to the office grind. Well, McCleary didn't say anything more about it the next day, even though we'd throw in a chance comment about Mars every now and then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But Mac didn't rise to the bait. We gradually forgot about it. The next couple of weeks came and went, and then my 2 weeks in August. Like I said before, my vacation dough had gone to pay the doctor, so I stayed at home and watered the begonias. The Monday morning after vacation, we were all back in the office. If anything looked more fagged than we had when we left. When lunchtime rolled around, Donnelly and Young and I piled our lunches on Donnelly's desk. His desk was near a window on the north side of the building, so we could get the breeze, and talked about what we had done during vacation. McCleary ambled up, and like it usually does after McCleary comes around, the conversation just naturally died down. After a 2 minute silence, I finally took the hook. "Okay, Mac," I said, "I know you're just dying to tell us. Where did you go?" He almost looked surprised. "To Mars," he said, like he might have said Aunt Minnie's. The three of us looked blank for a minute, and then we caught on. It took us a while to recover from laughing, and my sides were still aching when I saw McCleary's face. It definitely had a hurt look on it. "You don't think I did?" he accused us. "Oh, come off it, McCleary," I said crossly. "A gag's a gag, but it can be carried too far. Where'd you go? California? Oregon? Someplace like that?" "I said I went to Mars," McCleary repeated hotly, "and I can prove it." "Sure," I said, "like I can prove the world's flat and it's supported by 4 elephants standing on a turtle's back like the old Greeks." I cut off. McCleary had thrown a couple of pasteboards on the desk, and I picked them up. The printing on it was like you see on a Pullman ticket. It said something about a roomette, first class passage on the Martian Prince, for $154.75, and there was even a place where they had the tax figured. In 2 blanks at the top of the ticket, they had it filled out to E. C. McCleary and wife. The bottom half was torn off just like they do with train tickets. "Very clever," I said, "but you shouldn't have gone to all that trouble to have these printed up." McCleary scowled and dropped a little bunch of Kodachrome slides on the desk. I took one and held it up to the light. It showed Mac and his wife mounted on something that looked like a cross between a camel and a zebra. They were at the top of a sand dune, and in the distance you could see the towers of a city. The funny thing was the towers looked a little, but not much, like minarets, and the sand dunes were colored a beautiful pink. I passed it on to Donnelly and Young and started leafing through the rest. They were beautiful slides. McCleary and spouse in front of various structures in a delicately tinted marble and crystal city. McCleary in a pink and black boat on a canal that looked as wide as the Mississippi. McCleary standing on a strangely carved sandstone parapet, admiring a sunset caused by a sun looking half as big as ours. and everywhere were the dunes of pink sand. "Pictures can be faked, Mac," I said. He looked hurt and got some things out of his desk. A sateen pillow with scenes like those on his snapshots, an urn filled with pink sand, a tiny boat like a gondola, only different, a letter opener made out of peculiar, bubbly pink glass. They were all stamped "Souvenir of Mars," and that kind of junk you don't have made up for a gag. I know mass-produced articles when I see them. "We couldn't afford the first-class tour," McCleary said expansively, "but I figure we can cover that next year." He turned to me puzzledly. "I asked the passenger agent about the Princess of Mars, and he said he had never heard of the ship. And it's Mars City, not Marsport. Couldn't understand how you made a mistake." "It was easy," I said weakly. I pointed to the pasteboard ducats. "Where'd you get these, Mac?" He waved generously in the direction of downtown. "Like you said, there's a couple of agencies downtown." "You know, sometimes I think we misjudged McCleary. It takes a while to get to know a guy like Mac. Maybe his Louie is brighter than Johnny, and maybe his chugmobile is something terrific. For the last few years, all on account of Mac, my 2 weeks in August have really been well spent. Beautiful. Why, from Mars City you can see low-slung mountains in the distance, and dunes of soft red sand stretching out to them, and the sunsets when you're standing on the parapets of that delicate crystal city. And, man, fishing in the Grand Canal. How do you get to Mars? There's probably a couple of agencies in your own town. You can look them up in your phone book under 'Vacation at the Planets of Pleasure' or something like that. They might be a little difficult to find, though. You see, they're not very well advertised yet." End of 2 Weeks in August, by Frank M. Robinson.
Whiskaboom by Alan Arkin. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Dale Grothmann. Jack's blunder was disastrous, but what he worried about was, would Einstein have approved? Whiskaboom by Alan Arkin. Dear Mr. Gretsch, Mrs. Burroughs and I are sending your son Jack to you because we do not know what else to do with him. As you can see, we can't keep him with us in his present condition. Also, Jack owes us 2 weeks' rent, and since Mrs. Burroughs and I are retired, we would appreciate you sending the money. It has been a dry year and our garden has done poorly. The only reason we put up with your son in the first place was because we are so hard-pressed. He saw the sign on the porch, rang the bell, and paid Mrs. Burroughs a month's rent without even looking at the room. Then he ran out to his car and commenced pulling out suitcases and boxes and dragging them upstairs. After the third trip, Mrs. Burroughs saw he was having trouble with the stuff, and he looked kind of worn out, so she offered to help. He gave her a hard look, as she described it to me when I got home. He said, "I don't want anyone touching anything. Please don't interfere." "I didn't mean to interfere," my wife told him. "I only wanted to help." "I don't want any help," he said quietly, but with a wild look in his eyes, and he staggered upstairs with the last of his baggage and locked the door. When I got home, Mrs. Burroughs told me she thought I ought to go have a look at the new boarder. I went up, thinking we'd have a little chat and straighten things out. I could hear him inside hammering on something. He didn't hear my first knock or the second. I got sore and nearly banged the door down, at which time he decided to open up. I charged in ready to fight a bear, and there was this skinny, red-headed son of yours glaring at me. "That's a lot of hammering you're doing, son," I said. "That's the only way I can get these boxes open, and don't call me son." "I don't like to disturb you, Mr. Gritch, but Mrs. Burroughs is a little upset over the way you acted today. I think you ought to come down for a cup of tea and get acquainted." "I know I was rude," he said, looking a little ashamed. but I have waited for years for a chance to get to work on my own with no interference. I'll come down tomorrow when I have got all my equipment set up and apologize to Mrs. Burroughs then. I asked him what he was working on, but he said he would explain later. Before I got out the door, he was hammering again. He worked till midnight. We saw Jack at mealtimes for the next few days, but he didn't talk much. We learned that he was 26 in spite of his looking like a boy in his teens, that he thought Professor Einstein was the greatest man ever, and that he disliked being called son. Of his experiment, he didn't have much to say then. He saw Mrs. Burroughs was a little nervous about his experimenting in the guest room, and he assured her that it was not dangerous. Before the week was out, we started hearing the noises. The first one was like a wire brush going around a barrel. It went whisk, whisk. Then he rigged up something that went skaboom every few seconds, like a loud heartbeat. Once in a while, he got in a sound like a creaking well pump, but mostly it was skaboom and whisk, which eventually settled down to a steady, rhythmic whiskaboom, whiskaboom. It was kind of pleasant. Neither of us saw him for 2 days. The noises kept going. Mrs. Burroughs was alarmed because he was not answering her knock at mealtimes, and one morning she charged upstairs and hollered at him through the door. "You stop your nonsense this minute and come down to breakfast." "I'm not hungry," he called back. "You open this door," she ordered, and by George he did. "Your whiskaboom, or whatever it is, will wait until after breakfast." He sat at the table, but he was a tired boy. He had a cold. His eyelids kept battling, and I don't believe he could have lifted his coffee cup. He tried to look awake, and then over he went with his face in the oatmeal. Mrs. Burroughs ran for the ammonia, but he was out cold, so we wiped the oatmeal off his face and carried him upstairs. My wife rubbed Jack's wrist with garlic and put a wet towel on his face, and presently he came to. He looked wildly about the room at his machinery. It was all there, and strange-looking stuff, too. "Please go away," he begged. "I've got work to do." Mrs. Burroughs helped him blow his nose. "There'll be no more work for you, Sonny. Not till you're well. We'll take care of you." He didn't seem to mind being called Sonny. He was sick for a week, and we tended him like one of our own. We got to know him pretty well. And we also got to know you. Now, Mr. Gritch, whatever you're doing in your laboratory is your business. You could be making atomic disintegrators, for all Jack told us. But he does not like it or approve of it, and he told us about your running battle with him to keep him working on your project instead of his own. Jack tried to explain his ideas of harnessing time and what he called the reintegration principle. It was all so much whiskaboom to us, so to speak, but he claimed it was for the good of mankind, which is fine with us. But he said you would not let him work it out because there was less money in it than in your project, and this is why he had to get away and work and worry himself into a collapse. When he got well, Mrs. Burroughs told him, "From now on, you're going to have 3 meals a day and 8 hours sleep, and in between you can play on your whiskaboom all you please." The whiskabooming became as familiar to us as our own voices. Last Sunday, Mrs. Burroughs and I came home from church about noon. She went inside through the front door to fix dinner. I walked around the house to look at the garden, and the moment I walked past the front of the house, I got the shock of my life. The house disappeared. I was too surprised to stop walking, and a step later I was standing at the back of the house, and it was all there. I stepped back, and the whole house vanished again. One more step, and I was at the front. It looked like a real house in the front and in the back, but there wasn't any in between. It was like one of those false front saloons on the movie lots, but thinner. I thought of my wife, who had gone into the kitchen and, for all I knew, was as thin as a house, and I went charging in the back door, yelling, "Are you all right?" "Of course I'm all right. What's the matter with you?" I grabbed her, and she was all there, thank heavens. She giggled and called me an old fool, but I dragged her outside and showed her what had happened to our house. She saw it too, so I knew I didn't have sunstroke, but she couldn't understand it any better than I. Right about then, I detected a prominent absence of whiskabooming. "Jack!" I hollered, and we hurried back into the house and upstairs. Well, Mr. Gritch, it was so pitiful I can't describe it. He was there, but I never saw a more miserable human being. He was not only thin, but also flat, like a cartoon of a man who'd been steamrolled. He was lying on the bed, holding onto the covers, with no more substance to him than a thin piece of paper. Less. Mrs. Burroughs took one of his shoulders between her thumb and forefinger, and I took the other. We held him up. There was a breeze coming through the window, and Jack, well, he waved in the breeze. We closed the window and laid him down again, and he tried to explain what had happened. "Professor Einstein wouldn't like this," he moaned. "Something went wrong." He cried, shuddering. He went on, gasping and mumbling, and we gathered that he had hooked up a circuit the wrong way. "I didn't harness the fourth. I'd chopped off the third dimension. Einstein would not have approved." He was relieved to learn that the damage had been confined to himself and the house, so far as we knew. Like the house, Jack had insides, but we don't know where they are. We poured tea down him, and he can eat after a fashion, but there is never a sign of a lump anywhere. At night, we pinned him to the bed with clothespins, so he wouldn't blow off the bed. Next morning, we rigged a line and pinned him to it so he could sit up. "I know what to do," he said, "but I have to go back to the lab. Dad would have to let me have his staff and all sorts of equipment, and he won't do it." "If he thinks more of his money than he does his own son," Mrs. Burroughs said, "then he's an unnatural father." But Jack made us promise not to get in touch with you. Still, people are beginning to talk. The man from the electric company couldn't find the meter yesterday because it's attached to the middle of the outside wall and has vanished. Mr. Greach, we are parents, and we feel that you will not hesitate a moment to do whatever is necessary to get Jack back into shape. So, despite our promise, we are sending Jack to you by registered parcel post, airmail. He doesn't mind the cardboard mailing tube he is rolled up in, as he has been sleeping in it, finding it more comfortable than being pinned to the sheets. Jack is a fine boy, sir, and we hope to hear soon that he is back to normal and doing the work he wants to do. Very truly yours, W. Burroughs. P.S. When Jack figures out the reintegration principle, we would appreciate his fixing our house. We get along as usual, but it makes us nervous to live in a house that, strictly speaking, has no insides. W.B. End of Whiskaboom by Alan Arkin.